They were wrong. 6 years later, that company has built its own operating system from scratch. Not a copy, not a modified version of Android with a different name painted on top. A completely new operating system with its own kernel, its own app store, its own design language, and its own ecosystem of more than 400,000 applications. It already runs on 900 million devices. It has overtaken Apple's iOS to become the second largest mobile operating system in China, and as of the first quarter of 2026, it holds 5% of the global smartphone market and climbing, while Android just recorded its lowest global market share in history, dropping from 80% to 73%. The operating system is called HarmonyOS, and if you have not heard of it yet, you will. If you enjoy videos about technology that is quietly reshaping the balance of power between the world's biggest companies, hit like and subscribe so you never miss one. This story starts with a phone call that changed everything. To understand why HarmonyOS exists, you need to understand what happened to Huawei in 2018. And to understand that, you need to know what Huawei was before the ban. In the mid-2010s, Huawei was one of the fastest growing smartphone companies on the planet, not just in China, globally. By 2019, Huawei had reached 18% of the global smartphone market, putting it in second place behind Samsung and ahead of Apple. In some quarters during 2019, Huawei actually outsold Samsung in certain regions, briefly holding the #1 position worldwide. Huawei phones were selling across Europe, where the company had become a household name. In countries like Spain, Italy, and Germany, Huawei had retail stores and shopping malls, carrier partnerships with every major network, and marketing campaigns on billboards and television. In Latin America, Southeast Asia, and Africa, the brand was growing even faster because Huawei offered flagship quality cameras and build quality at prices hundreds of dollars below Apple and Samsung. The P-series and Mate series phones were winning camera comparison tests against iPhones and Galaxy phones. The partnership with Leica, the legendary German camera company, gave Huawei phones a photography credibility that no other Chinese brand had. Technology reviewers were calling the Huawei P30 Pro the best camera phone ever made. Sales were accelerating quarter after quarter. The company also happened to be the world's largest manufacturer of telecommunications equipment. It built the base stations, the network switches, and the infrastructure that mobile networks in dozens of countries relied on to deliver 4G and 5G service. Huawei equipment ran a significant portion of the cellular networks in Europe, Asia, Africa, and Latin America. Huawei was not just a phone company. It was a backbone company. It sat inside the infrastructure that connected billions of people to the internet every single day. Then, in May 2019, the US Department of Commerce placed Huawei on the Entity List. This meant that American companies could no longer sell technology to Huawei without a special license. And the most important American company in Huawei's supply chain was not a chipmaker or a parts supplier. It was Google. Google provides two things to Android phone makers. The first is the Android Open Source Project, which is the basic code that anyone can use for free. The second is Google Mobile Services, which includes Google Play Store, Gmail, Google Maps, YouTube, and the entire suite of apps that most people outside China consider essential to using a smartphone. Without Google Mobile Services, an Android phone in Europe or Latin America is essentially a brick with a nice screen. You cannot download apps. You cannot use Google Maps. You cannot access your Gmail. You cannot watch YouTube. When the ban hit, Google was forced to cut Huawei off from Google Mobile Services. Huawei could still use the open source version of Android, but it could not ship phones with the Google apps that customers expected. The impact was immediate and devastating. Huawei's global smartphone market share collapsed. In 2019, the company shipped 240 million phones. By 2021, that number had dropped below 35 million, a decline of more than 85% in 2 years. In Europe, where Huawei had built a strong presence, sales fell off a cliff. Customers stopped buying Huawei phones because the phones no longer worked the way they expected. The analysts were right about one thing. The Huawei they knew was finished. But what grew in its place was something nobody predicted. Huawei had actually started working on its own operating system before the ban. The project began as a contingency plan, a backup in case relations with the United States deteriorated. When the ban hit, that backup plan became the only plan. Huawei poured resources into it at a speed that even by Chinese tech standards was extraordinary. The first version of HarmonyOS launched in August 2019, just 3 months after the ban. But this early version was not a smartphone operating system. It ran on smart screens, on wearable devices, on IoT products. Huawei was not ready to put it on phones yet. The ecosystem was too thin. The apps were not there. Asking Chinese consumers to switch from Android to an operating system with almost no apps would have killed the project before it started. Instead, Huawei took a phased approach. Through 2020 and 2021, Huawei shipped phones running what was technically still based on the Android open source project, but with HarmonyOS branding and a growing layer of Huawei's own services on top. This gave the development team time to build out the app ecosystem while keeping phones functional for users who needed their apps to work. Behind the scenes, something much more ambitious was happening. Huawei was building an entirely new operating system from the ground up. Not a fork of Android, not a skin on top of someone else's code. A brand new kernel, new frameworks, new developer tools, new everything. The project was internally called Pure Blood, and the Chinese tech community adopted the name with enthusiasm. In late 2024, Huawei launched HarmonyOS NEXT. This was the Pure Blood version. It contains zero Android code, no AOSP, no compatibility layer, no borrowed libraries. A phone running HarmonyOS NEXT could not run Android apps at all. It could only run apps built specifically for HarmonyOS. This was the moment of no return. Huawei was not just building an alternative to Android, it was building a replacement. The technical achievement behind HarmonyOS NEXT is worth understanding because it explains why this is not just another Android fork, like the dozens that have been tried and failed before. Previous attempts to create Android alternatives, including Samsung's Tizen, Mozilla's Firefox OS, and Microsoft's Windows Phone, all struggled with the same fundamental problem. Developers did not want to build apps for a platform with a small user base, and users did not want to buy phones with few apps. It is a chicken and egg problem that killed every challenger. Huawei had one advantage that none of those companies had: a captive market of hundreds of millions of Chinese users who were already locked out of Google services and who had already been using Huawei's ecosystem of apps for years. These users did not need to be convinced to switch from Google. Google was already gone. They just needed the HarmonyOS versions of the Chinese apps they used every day to work as well as the Android versions. That is a much easier problem to solve than convincing people to abandon a working ecosystem. The kernel itself is a microkernel architecture, which is fundamentally different from the monolithic kernel that Android uses. Without getting too technical, a microkernel runs less code in the most privileged part of the operating system, which makes it more secure and more stable. Huawei claims the architecture also makes HarmonyOS faster and more efficient than Android, though independent benchmarks show mixed results depending on the task. What is not debatable is that the system is genuinely independent. No American code runs inside it. No American company can revoke access to it. No future sanctions can touch it. For the app ecosystem to work, Huawei needed hundreds of thousands of developers to build native HarmonyOS apps. Not ports, not emulated Android apps running in a compatibility layer. Native apps, built with Huawei's own development tools, running on Huawei's own frameworks. The company went after developers with a combination of financial incentives that reportedly included billions of yuan in development grants, technical support teams assigned to help major app publishers migrate, and a narrative of national technological independence that resonated strongly in the political climate of the time. The Chinese government was openly supportive, framing the project as part of the broader push for technological self-reliance that had become a national priority since the trade war began. Major Chinese tech companies, including Alibaba, Tencent, Baidu, and ByteDance, committed to building native HarmonyOS versions of their apps. State-owned banks, government service portals, and transportation systems followed. By mid-2026, the HarmonyOS App Store had more than 400,000 apps and services. Richard Yu, the chairman of Huawei's consumer business, announced at the HTC 2026 Developer Conference that the app experience on HarmonyOS was approaching parity with Android and iOS, and that HarmonyOS 7.0 had officially become the second largest smartphone operating system in China. That claim is debatable outside China, but inside China, where Google services were already blocked and where the app ecosystem is dominated by domestic companies, the transition has been remarkably smooth. Chinese consumers switching from an Android phone to a HarmonyOS phone lose almost nothing in terms of functionality. WeChat works, Alipay works, Douyin works, Taobao works. The apps that define daily life in China are all there. Now look at the numbers. As of the first quarter of 2026, HarmonyOS holds 19% of the smartphone market in China. That puts it ahead of Apple's iOS, which sits at 16%. Android still leads at roughly 60% in China, but HarmonyOS has already taken the second position. In a market of over 1.4 billion people, 19% is not a niche. It is hundreds of millions of users. Globally, the picture is smaller, but the trajectory is clear. HarmonyOS went from 3% global market share in 2025 to 5% in the first quarter of 2026. That does not sound like a lot until you realize what it displaced. Android's global share fell from 80% to 73% over the same period. That is not all because of HarmonyOS. Some of it is Apple. Some of it is market shifts in the entry-level segment. But HarmonyOS is now officially the third mobile operating system in the world. The first time a third player has reached this scale since Microsoft killed Windows Phone in 2017. And Huawei is not stopping at China. The company has announced plans to bring HarmonyOS to international markets starting in 2026. The first targets are Hong Kong, Southeast Asia, and the Middle East. These are regions where Huawei still has brand recognition from its pre-ban days, where Google services are available but not dominant in the way they are in Europe, and where Chinese tech infrastructure is already deeply embedded through the Belt and Road Initiative and existing Huawei network equipment. If HarmonyOS gains traction in these markets, it creates something that has not existed in the mobile industry for over a decade. A genuine three-way race. Android, iOS, and HarmonyOS, each backed by a different country's technology ecosystem, each with its own app store, its own AI assistant, its own cloud services, and its own rules about data, privacy, and censorship. The Southeast Asian market alone is enormous. Indonesia, Vietnam, Thailand, the Philippines, and Malaysia together represent over 500 million smartphone users. Many of these countries already have deep economic ties with China through trade, infrastructure investment, and the Belt and Road Initiative. Huawei network equipment already powers a significant portion of the cellular infrastructure in the region. The transition from selling network hardware to offering the software that runs on the phones using that hardware is a natural extension of a relationship that already exists. In the Middle East, Huawei has maintained a strong presence throughout the sanctions era. The United Arab Emirates, Saudi Arabia, and other Gulf states have shown willingness to engage with Chinese technology companies in ways that European countries have been more hesitant about. Huawei already has retail stores in Dubai and Riyadh. The brand recognition is there, the distribution channels are there. What was missing was a compelling software story, and HarmonyOS provides that. There is another dimension to this that most technology coverage misses. HarmonyOS is not just a phone operating system. It is designed from the ground up to run across every type of device. Smartphones, tablets, smartwatches, smart TVs, car infotainment systems, refrigerators, air conditioners, light switches. The whole point of the architecture is that every device running HarmonyOS can communicate with every other device seamlessly. Your phone talks to your watch talks to your car talks to your home. One operating system, one account, one ecosystem. This is what Apple has been building with its walled garden for 20 years. But Apple does it with proprietary hardware that only Apple makes. Huawei is offering HarmonyOS to other manufacturers. Chinese automakers like BYD, Chery, BAIC, and Cirrus already ship cars with HarmonyOS-based infotainment systems. Huawei's automotive division provides the software that powers the dashboard, the navigation, the voice assistant, and the driver monitoring system in more than a dozen vehicle models. When you sit inside a car running HarmonyOS and your phone is also running HarmonyOS, the experience is seamless. Your music continues from your phone to the car speakers. Your navigation transfers from the phone screen to the dashboard. Your calendar reminders appear on the car display. This cross-device integration is not a future promise. It is shipping today in vehicles that Chinese consumers are buying right now. Smart home manufacturers are integrating HarmonyOS into appliances. Wearable companies are adopting it for smartwatches and fitness bands. Enterprise customers are exploring it for industrial IoT applications. The ecosystem is expanding not just in users, but in the types of devices it touches, creating a network effect where each new device category makes the platform more valuable for every other category. The strategic implications go beyond consumer technology. An operating system is not just software. It is a platform through which data flows, through which AI models are trained, through which governments and companies exert influence over what users see, do, and buy. For the past 15 years, that platform has been controlled by two American companies, Google and Apple. Every phone in the world, with very few exceptions, has run software that was designed, updated, and ultimately controlled from California. HarmonyOS breaks that arrangement. A phone running HarmonyOS does not connect to Google's servers. It does not feed data into Google's advertising system. It does not rely on Apple's App Store policies. It runs on Chinese cloud infrastructure, uses Chinese AI services, and operates under Chinese data governance rules. For countries that are uncomfortable with their digital infrastructure depending on American companies, HarmonyOS offers an alternative that did not exist before. Whether this is a good thing or a bad thing depends entirely on your perspective. For Chinese consumers and the Chinese government, it represents technological independence, a smartphone ecosystem that cannot be shut off by a foreign power ever again. The 2018 ban proved that dependence on American software was a strategic vulnerability. HarmonyOS is the permanent fix. For the United States and its allies, a Chinese operating system spreading across Asia, Africa, and the Middle East raises questions about surveillance, data sovereignty, and the fragmentation of the global internet into competing technology zones. These are not hypothetical concerns. They are already being debated in policy circles in Washington, Brussels, and Tokyo. For Google, the picture is simply uncomfortable. Android's global market share just hit its lowest point in years. The most populous country on Earth is systematically removing Android from its devices. And the company that is doing it was created by an American sanctions policy that was supposed to weaken Huawei, not force it to become a platform competitor. The irony of the situation is hard to miss. The United States banned Huawei from using Android to protect American technological dominance. In response, Huawei built an operating system that now threatens Android's position as the world's default mobile platform. The ban did not kill Huawei's software ambitions, it created them. Before 2018, Huawei had no reason to build its own operating system. Android worked, Google services worked. The relationship was profitable for everyone. The ban forced Huawei into a corner, and what came out of that corner was not a weakened company begging for access. It was a platform competitor with nearly 1 billion devices and a clear path to international expansion. This pattern has happened before in the technology relationship between the United States and China. When the US restricted chip exports to China, Chinese semiconductor companies accelerated domestic development. When the US banned TikTok, discussions started. ByteDance doubled down on Douyin and expanded into markets the US had no influence over. When restrictions tightened on AI chip sales, Chinese researchers found ways to train competitive models on less powerful hardware. The pattern is consistent. Sanctions designed to create dependency instead create motivation to eliminate dependency permanently. The question that policymakers in Washington are now asking is whether the cure was worse than the disease. A Huawei that depended on Android was a Huawei that the United States had leverage over. A Huawei that runs its own operating system is a Huawei that the United States has no leverage over at all. And now that operating system is spreading to other countries, other devices, and other industries, building a parallel technology ecosystem that exists entirely outside American control. Right now, HarmonyOS runs on 900 million devices and counting. The number is projected to pass 1 billion before the end of this year. 19% of the world's largest smartphone market, 5% of the global market, over 400,000 apps, international expansion underway across Southeast Asia, the Middle East, and beyond. A full ecosystem spanning phones, watches, cars, and homes. As of January 2026, over 90% of all Huawei devices worldwide run the Android-free pureblood version. For 15 years, the mobile operating system market has been a two-player game: Android and iOS, Google and Apple, America and America. That era is ending. A third player has arrived, built in the one place the first two players tried to shut out, and it is growing faster than either of them expected. If this video changed how you think about the phone in your pocket and who controls the software it runs on, hit like and subscribe for more. Turn on notifications so you never miss a video. And I want to hear from you. The United States banned Huawei from Android to weaken it. Instead, Huawei built a replacement that now has 900 million users and is expanding globally. If a ban designed to destroy a company ends up creating a more dangerous competitor, was the ban a mistake? Drop your answer in the comments.